He delivered it with such authority and clarity. But for me, because he did two jobs here, he welcomed us and did a vote of thanks. For me, I think that is also the moral in it, that when we focus on Made in Nigeria, we are headed for double-digit growth. Can we put our hands together one more time? Somebody once said that leadership is like a race track. Those drivers that do so well, that the Rosbergs of this world, the Lewis Hamiltons of this world, are those who thrive on the dangerous curves. And so people have likened economic downturn for most companies and nations like the dangerous curves. On the straight path, all you need is the raw power. On the dangerous curves, you need what people call strategic finesse. And I believe Made in Nigeria is part of that strategic finesse that will make us get out of this dangerous curve onto growth. And one man who understands this very clearly, and the chairman of NESG actually alluded to this, the fact that the Nigerian Economic Summit is a partnership between the private sector and the public sector. And the man that sits at top of that ministry is the Honorable Minister of Budget and National Planning. Let me welcome here the Distinguished Senator Udoma to address us. I welcome you, sir.
Your Excellency, the President of Nigeria, members of the National Assembly, honorable ministers, the chairman of NESG, captains of industry, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to join the chairman of the NESG to welcome you all to the 22nd Nigerian Economic Summit. As you all know, the summit is a 3-day annual event organized by the NESG, working in collaboration with the Ministry of Budget and National Planning. Let me express our very sincere thanks to His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. He believes in leading from the front, and that is why he's here in person. A round of applause for him. I would also like to appreciate and thank His Excellency the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osibajo, who will be joining us later on this morning. There can be no better evidence, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, of the very strong support this administration has for the Made in Nigeria campaign, to have both the President as well as the Vice President personally involved. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the history of the Nigerian Economic Summit can be traced to 1993, when the summit was first inaugurated by Dr. Ernest Shonekan, former head of the interim national government. It was inaugurated as a platform to promote public-private sector dialogue towards accelerated national development. Since its inception 23 years ago, the summit has become one of the largest gatherings dedicated to finding solutions to the challenges of moving the Nigerian economy forward. Apart from policymakers and captains of industry from the public and private sectors, the summit also has in attendance representatives of academia, civil society organizations, and our development partners. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I participated very actively in that first summit in 1993. I recall that at that first summit, many of the public sector participants were very suspicious of those of us from the private sector, because I was then in the private sector. Indeed, they saw us as interfering in the running of government. They were wary of proposals originating from the private sector. They saw many of them as likely to be self-serving. This was particularly the case where the companies had foreign shareholding. Indeed, some of the ministers, permanent secretaries and directors who participated expressed to me that they saw themselves as the true custodians of the public interest. And their main task was indeed to protect the country from the excesses of the business class, not to sit down to disclose government strategies to them. However, I must say that one of the important successes of the summit process, involving as it does dialogue and discussion between the private and public sectors, has been indeed to dissipate a lot of this suspicion and bring the two sides much closer together. The public sector this year, represented by my ministry, the Ministry of Budget and National Planning, has been taking a much more proactive role in the organization of recent summits. The public sector is also beginning to accept the private sector as true partners in the development of Nigeria. For instance, the public sector used to talk about having exclusive control of the commanding heights of the economy. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I assure you that this has since changed. Now, we in the public sector, because I'm now in the public sector and I'm wearing that hat, we do concede that it is the private sector that is the true engine of growth. We concede, and it is now accepted, that there is no sector that the private sector should be excluded from participating in. For instance, we all now agree that the private sector has a role to play in such previously considered no-go areas, such as telecommunications, postal services, power and water supply and distribution, and even the provision of rail, road, and ports infrastructure. We're indeed looking for partnership from the private sector in solving our infrastructure challenges. And the good news, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, is that civil servants are also beginning to understand that they, as government officials, have a responsibility not just to police the private sector, but indeed the more important responsibility is to facilitate and promote an environment that is conducive for business growth. But to the private sector participants here gathered, let me say that to whom much is given, much is expected. Having conceded that you are the engine of development, those of us in government expect to see that engine firing on all cylinders. And that is the challenge that I throw to all you captains of industry gathered here today. You should leave this summit with a renewed determination to step up the tempo of your activities, confident that you have in us a government that is determined to support enterprise, that is determined to support productivity. I'm confident, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that those of you who heed this and invest more aggressively in Nigeria, I'm confident that the returns you make will more than justify your investments. This year's summit is dedicated to the subject of Made in Nigeria. As you know, the government is already implementing policies aimed at getting the economy out of the current recession. These include, amongst other things, taking actions to reduce the disruptions in the Niger Delta, fast-tracking measures to raise funding from foreign loans and other sources to fund the 2016 capital budget, targeting capital releases to projects with impact on employment, speeding up the implementation of the social investment programs, and so on. Already, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our focus on agriculture is beginning to yield fruit, as indications are that the agricultural sector will show quite strong growth in the third quarter, which is just ending. But distinguished ladies and gentlemen, even after getting out of the recession, we will continue with the implementation of our strategic implementation plan, which was launched by government at the time the 2016 budget was signed into law by President Muhammadu Buhari. The plan will restructure our economy onto the path of sustainable growth. As you know, the SIP is anchored on the commitment of the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari to create a more diversified, sustainable, and inclusive economy that releases the latent potential of the Nigerian people, of communities, and the natural resource endowments across the nation's federating units. The strategies for achieving these are all set out in the SIP document. These cut across 6 thematic areas. One of those thematic areas is to diversify the economy by fast-tracking industrialization, agriculture, and agro-allied processing, as well as attracting investment into the solid minerals, tourism, and entertainment sectors. An important mechanism for doing this is by encouraging a Made in Nigeria philosophy and preference to take root in all our practices. As a government, we are taking steps to encourage our officials to buy Made in Nigeria products. We have also been working with private sector and other related stakeholders to encourage more production and consumption of Made in Nigeria goods and services. We believe that with more patronage, Nigerian producers will be encouraged to improve on our quality and create jobs for our teeming youth. There is no doubt, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that the fastest route to grow our economy, the fastest route to create jobs is by encouraging our people to produce more and by encouraging our people to export more. This strategy will also generate foreign exchange and help in stabilizing and strengthening the Naira. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as I have already indicated, the government will continue to improve the enabling environment for businesses to thrive. We will continue, amongst other things, to prioritize our spending towards critical infrastructure to improve Nigerian competitiveness. Government agencies will work with the private sector to support research with a view to developing high-quality indigenous products and technologies. Many of our programs, the programs that we're currently conducting, have been structured in such a way as to stimulate domestic production. For instance, our school feeding program will utilize only locally grown and locally produced food items. But much more needs to be done by both the public and the private sector to encourage and support local production. This summit will provide an opportunity to examine what more can be done. How do we promote the consumption of made-in-Nigeria goods and services? How do we improve the quality of made-in-Nigeria goods to bring them to international standards so that they can be exported? How can we support our SMEs to be able to compete? It is our expectation that this summit will provide a platform to sharpen the focus of the conversation and also offer recommendations that will help reinvigorate our industries and services so as to curtail the growing demand for foreign exchange for imported finished goods. As the chairman of the NESG said, as part of the efforts towards making this year's summit focused and result-oriented, it has been structured to include a policy dialogue on the economy, a roundtable session on jobs, as well as parallel and syndicate sessions. The key thrust of the various sessions will be to facilitate stakeholders' discussion on the practical issues, opportunities, policies, and regulations needed for the concept of Made in Nigeria to become an economic growth and development agenda in Nigeria. Your Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in closing, let me emphasize that we expect the key outcomes of each session to include a practical road map. I want to emphasize this because we have many talk shops in Nigeria. We have very many good ideas which have been expressed over the years. I have myself participated in many similar discussions, good ideas, but that's where they end. Let this one not end in that way. Let us have a clear roadmap. Let us identify what needs to be done in 1 month, in 3 months, in 6 months, 1 year, and thereafter. Let us have a means of monitoring and ensuring that we implement. Because ultimately, it's about implementation. So finally, I wish to once again welcome you all to the 22nd Nigerian Economic Summit. I look forward to very productive engagement, and I look forward to the implementation thereafter. And I can assure you that this government will lead by example. Thank you very much.